How many men who listen to me tonight have served their nation in other wars? How very many are not here to listen? The war in Vietnam is not like these other wars. Yet, finally, war is always the same. It is young men dying in the fullness of their promise. It is trying to kill a man that you do not even know well enough to hate. Therefore, to know war is to know that there is still madness in this world.
My dad was the first in his family to graduate from high school. After high school, he enlisted because World War II was on. And he was in the Navy in the South Pacific. When he came home, he got married. And because of the GI Bill, he was able to go to college. He went to Springfield College. And when he was a senior, I was born. And then when he got his master's the next year, my sister was born. And the 6 of us grew up in Batavia and Stafford. We all went to Leroy High School. My mom was a stay-home mom until the youngest, the twins, went to high school, and then she got a job at Batavia Middle School as a monitor. Yeah, I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters. I'm the oldest. My sister Debbie was a kindergarten teacher for 38 years in Batavia. My brother Michael went to the Naval Academy. He's an engineer in Florida. My sister Cindy has her PhD in nursing. She teaches at St. John Fisher. The twins, one of them is in Ossining. He manages properties. And his older brother by 20 minutes is down in Florida. He owns a florist shop in the Fort Lauderdale area. We lived out in Stafford. We took the bus into Leroy every day, and it was a very, very good school. We were challenged by our teachers. In high school, I was an athlete. I was on the cross-country and track teams. The friends that I had were mostly athletes and kids in the neighborhood. And when I say in the neighborhood, it's, they were 2, 3, 4 miles away. The kids that we rode to school with and played baseball in the summer. I worked at a local farm. I worked Saturdays mostly, holidays, and all summer. We did hay, we did potatoes, we did wood, and that got me in pretty good shape. Plus, got me some money so I could put that away to go to college. When we were in high school, I'd always wanted to go to college. I always wanted to be a teacher. So that was the track that I had planned on. A lot of fellas went into college because it was a draft deferment. We all had our aspirations, and truthfully, I'd hoped that the war in Vietnam would be over by the time I graduated. That was not the case, so they had the draft lottery. I was draft number 4 out of 366, so I didn't have to worry about getting a haircut or buying a suit and going for job interviews because I was going to get drafted. I passed my physical. I thought my eyes would keep me out, but they didn't. So I got my draft notice after I graduated, and then they waited in Congress for a little while to reinstitute the draft. And I had 2 friends that were in the same situation. We all wanted to be teachers, and it got to be July, and we hadn't gotten drafted. So we decided to volunteer for the draft so that we could get out in August to apply for jobs to start school in September. As it was, they wouldn't have drafted us until October, and that would have put our careers a year behind. So in retrospect, that was a good idea. So that's what we did. I didn't actually get drafted. I volunteered for the draft. I was very apprehensive. I won't say I was scared, but we had all been to funerals. The my high school, you could get the afternoon off if you went to the funeral of one of the boys that came home. One of them was a guy I admired a great deal, Gary Scott. He was very smart, very articulate, great athlete, president of the student council. That's where I got to know him, in the student council. And he was a second lieutenant and was killed. And we all went to the funeral. It was a very, very sad day for everybody. And that's what was weighing over most of the guys. You know, am I going to go to Vietnam and be killed? When we got to Fort Dix, we had testing, and I did very well on the tests, I guess, because they asked if I wanted to be an officer. I said no. They asked if what kind of a job I wanted. I said I wanted a clerk-type job because I had a degree in English. They asked where I wanted to be in the world. And I said, well, I'd like to go to Germany. And they said, well, if you want the clerk job, that's another 3 years. If you want to go to Germany, that's 3 years beyond that. I said, no, I want 2 years and I want to get out. And as it was, they sent me to Meteorological Observer School in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And what we learned to do was send up weather balloons and take the readings of what they call the ballistic winds, how cold they were, what direction, how fast, and especially the humidity. And we would send our results to the artillery, and they would figure out how far away they were shooting, what the trajectory was, and what they'd be shooting through. In World War II, they had advanced observers saying, okay, you're 100 yards too far, you're 200 yards to the left. In Vietnam, they found out that when that first shell hit, the enemy was gone. So they needed that first strike accuracy, and that's what my whole division was all about. We finished up in December, early December, and we had orders to report to McGuire Air Force Base. I got to go to Germany. Our entire class before that all went to Vietnam. And the warrant officer in charge of our group said, I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means that everybody's recycling out, or if that means that you guys are going to be going elsewhere. Almost everybody in my class went to Germany. One went to Thule, Greenland. One went to the Panama Canal Zone. But we were supposed to report the 3rd of January, which I did. I reported the 3rd of January. Everybody else got there like the 28th of December because they wanted to save their leave time. So when I got to Europe, all the slots were filled. So I sat in Frankfurt for 2 days until they found a place for me, and they made me a clerk at headquarters and headquarters battery in Darmstadt. So without signing up, I got a job as a clerk in Germany. So I was very, very, very fortunate. Yeah, I have no complaints. No, I knew a couple of guys, but we were all alone. When I got orders for Germany, that's when I asked my college sweetheart to marry me. So I didn't want to do that if I was going to Vietnam. So that Christmas that I was home from Fort Sill, we got engaged. Since I got married, my wife came over, but I wasn't high enough rank to have housing, so we lived on the economy. We lived on the 3rd floor of a very nice family, the Bowers, and they were about 4 miles away. I would take the streetcar into work every morning. We started early. The office I worked for, it was the headquarters and headquarters battery. Our battery supplied the manpower for the headquarters. And the 5th Artillery was all over Germany, so there was a lot of paperwork. There were a lot of people under us. The general was two doors away from our office. I worked for the adjutant. And it was a very stressful job. Almost all the enlisted guys that worked there were college graduates. The officers that were above us were pretty much our age. We had a lot in common, and there should have been a big separation between officers and enlisted men, but most of those guys who are friends, they realized just for 12 weeks of training, we could have been officers also. And we were invited over to their homes on weekends, and we went to concerts together, and we were all very good friends. It was a very congenial atmosphere in the office, but like I say, it was very high pressure. Everything had to be done immediately. We'd get our projects in the morning, and then at 10 o'clock, the adjutant would come back from the command section and reassign everything. That project that was so important at 7 o'clock, well, it's not important anymore. Do this instead. If I hadn't been drafted, I would have gotten my master's degree. So I was very lucky to have an opportunity to attend classes for the University of Southern California in Darmstadt, Germany. So at night from 7 to 9:30, Monday, there was a class Monday, Wednesday, and there was a class Tuesday, Thursday. So I took college courses while I was there also. So between taking those classes and studying and writing the papers and doing guard duty and everything else, I remember being tired most of the time. And it really wasn't very fair to my wife, because when I was home, I was studying or reading. She was very independent, though. She would hop on the streetcar and go do the shopping and learn German, and we were very, very happy there. Yeah, actually, the first time I ever flew was from Fort Dix out to Oklahoma, and then we flew to Germany, and then first time in a foreign country, and for a while we just stayed on the base, but then we had our favorite guest house that we went to. A bunch of us would bowl on the base on Friday nights. Then we would go into town to our favorite place for beer and for food. The food was excellent there. And because the base had been there a long time, most of the people were happy to see GIs. Most of us were very well behaved. Sometimes guys would get out of hand. The MPs would have to be involved. But most of them, I got the impression that they liked our presence, not just because of the money, but because we were there. German guys didn't have to serve. We were all members of NATO, so it was all very congenial. I was the information specialist, and I was a clerk typist, and I was also in charge of files for everybody in the Fifth Corps. So I was lucky we got to go on inspections before the annual general inspection to make sure everybody's files were up to snuff and things were filed correctly, and the confidential stuff wasn't out with the regular stuff. And I got to meet some very interesting fellows in all different parts of Germany. Most frightening experience. We were given live ammunition once. We were sent to a place called Munster, just like the cheese, and it was a big bunker and lights and barbed wire, and they told us that's where there were a lot of ammunition, including missiles, and it had to be guarded. And we were given this live ammunition, and we had to walk the perimeter all night, and they had lights, but on the far end, there were two lights in a row that were out, so it was dark. And I remember being out there, and they said, "Don't fire your weapon. The paperwork is monumental." And I heard somebody. I said, "Halt, who goes there?" Nothing. And I heard it again. I said, "Halt, who goes there?" So I took 2 steps toward this person, and it turned. I remember being tired most of the time. There was a day when we had the annual general inspection, and I had an exam, and I had guard duty. I remember walking in the motor pool, carrying my weapon, almost falling asleep while I was walking. That was a very, very, very long day. Most of the people that we met were very, very good, happy, solid citizens, and I was very impressed with most of them. Very few of them were into drugs, into alcohol, anything. Most of them were happy to be where they were compared to other places. And overall, like I say, every day was long. I remember being tired all the time, but the 2 years went by very, very quickly. The paperwork could have been streamlined a lot more. I made a big mistake about my third month there. I would open up the mail in the morning and we would get a letter saying one of the cooks in our lower divisions had been named Cook of the Quarter. So here's a letter from the general of the 7th Army, and it came to the 5th Corps, and so our general would have to write a cover letter congratulating him. Well, the adjutant would take it into the general, and the general would say, write a letter. The adjutant would give it to me, and I'd write the letter. So I got this in the morning, and everything else had been done, so I typed up the letter. And I included it with it and sent it in, and, geez, the major came in. Ricky, get in here. What are you doing? Well, sir, I know that letter would have to be written. He said, you don't do that. So we don't write a letter until the general says to write the letter. But, sir, but nothing. This is the way things are. Wouldn't it be easier if, Ricky, stop arguing. So what I do afterwards, I'd take all the information, I'd write up the letter when I could, my lunch hour or whatever, and then the major come in, this letter has to be written. Geez, sir, it'll take me about half an hour. All right, do that right now, but what about this other project? Other project's on hold. Get this letter written. I go down to my buddy's room. I had the key. I'd open up his refrigerator, have a Diet Coke, and listen to some music for 20 minutes, come back, pick out the letter, and hand it in. So I was a very bad soldier. I didn't like following the orders and kept coming up with ways to make things more efficient, but they weren't hearing anything of it. I didn't have any trouble with the physical training. I enjoyed that. I didn't like marching. When we got over to Germany, we didn't do too much of that. But I remember marching. The fellow in front of me in basic training was from Tennessee. He was 6'4", had a very long stride. I have really tiny legs, so I was always out of step. I was always getting yelled at. And their punishment was, you will run around the formation while we're marching, which I enjoyed because I was an athlete. I was a runner. I would much rather do that than, I'm carrying my pack and my weapon and everything, but that really wasn't punishment for me. I remember the marching, and some of the training videos were really ancient, really boring. Guys were falling asleep. We'd get yelled at for that. I had a number of great commanding officers. The fellow that was in charge of us at boot camp was very, very understanding of our situation. He was very good to the guys that had been drafted. A lot of the guys in our group were regular Army, but about half of them were in the National Guard. If they joined the National Guard, they had the same training as everybody, but they got to stay home. And a lot of the guys were from the South. And I got to know people from the East Coast, from the cities, from the Deep South. And we had black kids at our high school, and they were on the track and cross country teams with me, but we were never close. And being in the barracks and going out on maneuvers and taking showers in the field, you got to know guys. And I can say that there's nobody that I really disliked. Everybody, had the attitude, we're in this together, let's pull together and let's make the best of it. There was none of that, you guys, there was more north-south than anything else. When we got to Oklahoma, there were two fellows lived in Texas, and they got their cars. So this other fellow and I from Pennsylvania, we were the Yankees, and they were the Rebels, and they'd always give us a hard time. They took us out for Mexican food one night and said, don't eat those peppers, those are really hot. I said, oh, that sounds like a challenge. So I put one on my mouth, and it just burned like crazy. I couldn't believe how hot it was. But I kept a straight face. I said, those aren't hot at all. And they go, what? And they both grabbed one. Oh, geez. Oh, you got us on that one, Rick. Yeah, you did. But they took us to the Hartz Mountains, to the Wichita Mountains to hike. And we saw buffalo and elk. and they took us to Anadarko, Oklahoma, to the Indian Museum there. And I wouldn't have had opportunities to do that if they didn't have their cars and they didn't invite us. So they're great. They also brought me back some rattlesnake rattles. I said, "Where'd you get those?" "On the road. You know, they go across the road, they get run, so you go out, chop them off, there you are, and that's where you got them." So I think I still have those. Yep. When I was in high school, it didn't seem like a very good idea to me. When I was in college, most of the people were against it. And I did participate in anti-war rallies and things like that. And I really didn't understand the politics of it. And I was very, very mad that young guys were over there, older men were making the decision, and we did not have a say in the matter. You had to be 21 to vote. We had no say in who our elected officials were, but they were telling us, "You are going to war." That, more than anything, seemed unfair to me. If anything good came out of that conflict, it was the fact that the voting age was lowered to 18. And I remember the debate at that time that it would give high school teachers, especially history teachers and college professors, a great deal of leverage to change elections. As it turned out, the group of people that votes least often are 18 to 21-year-olds, so that never manifested itself. But that was the debate that went on at that time. Well, I had friends that were in high school that were over there, and I'd hear everything 3 or 4 months afterwards. When I went to my high school reunion for the 10th year, there was, I'd met everybody, and I knew a couple of guys that had been wounded, and nobody, thankfully, had been killed. One fellow lost an eye. But I remember everybody stopped, and there was this slow dance, and there's these two guys dancing with each other. And I knew they were on the football team together. I said, "What's this?" And the girl next to me said, "They met when they were in Vietnam. Their mothers told them where each other were, so they got R&R together. They met, and they swore that not only would they survive, but they would dance with each other at our reunion." So that's that. 3 of them have now passed away. One fellow, they made him a tunnel rat. The Vietnamese had tunnels underground, and he was a very small fellow, and that's what they made him do, go into the tunnels and find that. And he came out very mentally unbalanced. He was not the same when he came back. But that's the story of my generation. The guys that were there have different stories. I was always in the background. I was always getting it later than everybody else. Yeah, there wasn't much choice in the matter. Many of the people that when I was in Germany, many of those fellows had done a tour in Vietnam. I remember one fellow that was a very heavy drinker, had a plate in his head because of the wounds that he had, and he told me, "I drink because it makes the pain go away." He was in constant pain. And when he died, he was not listed as a Vietnam War casualty, but in my mind, he certainly was. Not so much anymore. It's been a long time. The fellows that worked in my office loved my wife, and they would come over to our house Saturdays. We'd play bridge. They bought us a television. My wife would watch television, and of course all the American movies, all the American shows were in German, and that's how she helped pick up German. But she made them cookies. They'd come over for a home-cooked meal, and we corresponded, but then it got just to be Christmas, and then, after 25 years, we are not in contact anymore. Aside from the fellows that died after they came back here, no. Gary Scott is on the wall. He's the fellow that was the president of the Student Council. And there was another fellow that I didn't know very well, but he was a Leroy High School student that had been killed. But personally, no. I was trained to be a weather observer, but I was a clerk, and I was only over in Germany for 18 months, so I kept that job at the same time. If I had re-enlisted, I would have gone back to being what they trained me for. They spent about $20,000 to train me in a job that I never did. But that was the bureaucracy of the Army. That's the way it is. Most impressive place I went, I think, was probably East Berlin. I got command leave to go. We took the train in. I was excited. I couldn't sleep, and I opened up the window and looked out, and there's barbed wire all over the place, and this East German soldier going by. And I remember thinking, it's not that different. Their troops, our troops. He's got 2 o'clock in the morning guard duty, just like I did. When he came back around, I was looking at his AK-47 and noticed not only did he have a clip in it, we never had clips, but the port was open and I could see he was loaded. And I said, whoa, there is a difference. You know, when I'm on guard duty, I'm just going to be able to record who was there stealing tires or whatever. But he had live ammunition, and if somebody was going to escape into West Germany, he had orders to shoot him, so it was different. When we went through the gates at Checkpoint Charlie, they said, okay, when you're in here, you have no rights. If you do something wrong, they'll arrest you, they'll throw you in jail, and we won't know about it. He said, every once in a while you read about those prisoners exchanges in Potsdam. Well, that's what they are. You know, so don't do anything wrong. I was with a fellow that I really looked down on. His name was Homer Pop Cecil. He had a very severe gap between his teeth. He was from Louisiana, and he talked with a real Southern drawl and told me he did not graduate from high school. He had been involved in, some of his friends had stolen a car, and he was a member of the group, and the judge told him, you're either going to jail or enlist. So he enlisted. And like I say, I'm a college graduate. He dropped out of high school. We were walking across this big square, and this fellow came up to us. We're in uniform, and he started yelling us in German. And he was pushing his finger into Homer's chest, and finally he spit on his uniform. And my whole life flashed before my eyes. I said, we're going to get arrested. He's going to punch him. I'm never going to see anybody again. He just reached in his pocket, took out his handkerchief, wiped it off, and said, grab my arm, because I'm standing there, I'm ready for a fight. He says, Rick, let's go get some ice cream. And next thing I know, I'm sitting there, we got ice cream in front of me. What just happened? I said, that guy I thought he was going to hit you. He goes, yeah, but I said, he hates you. No, he don't hate me. He hates Americans. That was obvious. I didn't understand a word he was saying, but he didn't like us. And he wanted to prove to me that he was a better man. And I think I proved him wrong. This is a guy, like I said, that I didn't think had much smarts, but he saved me. Because if that guy had probably spit on me, I probably would have taken a swing at him and things had turned out different. But those are the kind of people I met. They were from all races, all parts of the country, all different educations, all different backgrounds, but all very, very good people. Looking back on it, that was a funny one. The rabbit incident was a funny one. And we had good times most of the time. We tried to keep things light, not so much practical jokes, but pointing out the hypocrisy of the military. And when we were out on maneuvers, we had all of these plans that the Army War College had come up with. And we were outside the Fulda Gap. There's a natural gap in the mountains from Czechoslovakia. Well, it was Czechoslovakia then, just like the Cumberland Gap in our country. And they had about 9 divisions of soldiers and tanks on the other side, because we knew that's where they were coming through if war broke out. And they had all these plans. This is what we'll do. This is what we'll do. This is what we'll do. And the maneuvers were, implementing those. As clerks, we had a much better idea. Number one was we just all leave and then have them try and pick up where we left off, and it would just drive them crazy. They'd go home. The other idea was for every clerk in Europe to send all their paperwork to Fulda, and it would just fill up that gap with paperwork, and they would never be able to get through. So those are the sort of things we did to keep each other entertained, amused, and to break down the boredom of the day-to-day work. Actually, the food when I was in was very good. They had transferred it over to civilians. The cooks that were in charge were still military people, but the food they bought from the economy, it had all been upgraded. When I was in Oklahoma, the entire cafeteria was done on a catering basis, and the food was excellent. Now, when I was in Germany, I had to eat on the economy, but it was very, very inexpensive. But I got to enjoy all kinds of wurst, and the French fries over there, the pommes frites were amazing. They're just, and I put on a lot of weight. So the food was great. I've eaten institutionalized food almost all my life, but I have no complaints about the food there. I only had C rations once when we were out in the field, and a lieutenant came by and was looking at the bottoms of the cans. He was looking for spaghetti. He says, "Ricky, I'll give you 2 of my cans for this can." I said, 2 for 1? All right, Lieutenant, I'll do that, but after we make the trade, you got to tell me why. So he gave me 2, and I'm looking at the can. They all look the same. He said, "You see these 2 numbers on the bottom?" He goes, "Those are the year that these were made." And he said, and this is a 52, those are 48s. He says, "I make it a point never to eat anything older than I am." So that was that story. After that, the C rations didn't taste very good either, since I know that they were over 20 years old. But I used to write to my girlfriend, but then, of course, we got married and she came over. I'd write to my folks, and she'd write to her folks. Every once in a while, we'd arrange for a phone call. And that was all very nice. But I was lucky I had my wife with me, and a lot of guys were very, very lonely. They'd go through their paycheck in a hurry. A lot of guys would loan other guys money at a small interest, and that's how they made their money. And there were a lot of people they knew it was payday. Outside the gates of the concern, there were guys selling rugs and shirts and hats, and there were drugs available, and there were women. I didn't do any of that. I was very, very lucky. I was relieved, and then also I had anxiety. Okay, so I'm out. Now what am I going to do? So I had applied to a lot of high schools for work, and my wife had also, and we were living with her parents on Oakwood Avenue, and nothing was coming across. Finally, I got an interview at Batavia High School. That's where my dad was the athletic director, but they had already decided who they're going to have. It was just a courtesy to my dad. But Alexander, New York, just south of Batavia, had a retirement, and they quickly needed to have somebody, so they called Batavia and said, "Give me your second, third, and fourth people." So they gave my name, so I got a phone call out of the blue, "Would you like to come in for an interview?" "Yes, I'll be there in an hour." "Well, tomorrow will be fine." So I interviewed and got the job and taught there for 37 years. A little while later, Gene got a job at East Aurora at the middle school, and those are the only jobs we ever had. We were very happy working with the students, and it worked out very, very well for both of us. Yep. Oh, they flew us home. Flew us to Fort Dix, and before we could get our last pay, we had to get a haircut. So my first day of teaching, I was very strack. I had very short hair. It was very different. They could tell right away, just like you could any place in Europe. You'd walk down the street, they no matter what you were wearing, they could tell you were a GI. So it's the travel was good. My folks met us at the Buffalo airport. My brothers and sisters were there. They took us out for dinner, and it was a nice homecoming. I didn't have any of the abuse that the guys that came in on the West Coast. They had people that would wait for them outside the airports to harass them, which, looking back on it, isn't even Christian. That's just about as low as it gets. But some people, that's how they live. I never met any of those folks. Never did. Yeah, my wife has most of the pictures. I have my picture from basic training, but most of the pictures I have are in civilian clothes. I don't have any of the office. I don't even think I have pictures of the guys that I worked with. Film was very expensive, and you had to take it with a camera. I did have a very nice camera, but I used that mostly when we were traveling, when we were going places to see things that I really wanted to remember. Yeah, we have two boys. Joe just is going to turn 34 in June. He's going to get his PhD in philosophy at the University of Washington. He graduated from the U of R with 3 degrees, mathematics, physics, and philosophy. And his younger brother just turned 30. He's going to graduate this May with a degree in mathematics. So he'll be Dr. Ricci before his older brother is. But they've both traveled the world on their own. We took them to Europe on our 25th anniversary, showed them where we used to work and showed them where we used to live and the places we had been. And that got them the wanderlust. So every vacation they travel. I was involved in racquetball leagues and golf leagues, and a friend of mine got me to join the American Legion here, and I was on a couple of committees. Even though I was never in Vietnam, the Vietnam veterans welcomed me into their group. They said, "You're our age, you were in the military, you took your chances just like everybody else, you just got sent to Germany." Other places around the country, I would have to be in country to do that. I'm not a member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars here, as they all are, but I am a member of the Legion and have been very pleased with the organization, the kind of work that they do for the community. And I was very lucky to be nominated and elected as their commander. And I'll probably be starting my 2nd year late in May. And I learn something every day. We have employees. We have a full bar here. We have renovated. I'm learning about taxes. I'm learning about the New York State Liquor Authority. And we have the bills to pay just like everybody else, the electric and the heat and the beer bill, and it's been fun. There's great people working here. And right now we're in the middle of fish fries. We have 100 volunteers every week put those fish fries on. They start Tuesday, then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday we put them on, and then we have a group that comes in about 9 o'clock Friday night. They've worked hard all week, but they come in and clean the kitchen. The final group comes in 6 o'clock Saturday morning and finishes with the cleanup. And we do that seven Fridays during Lent, and it's our major fundraiser. Great people. Like I say, I'm learning a lot. I'm learning every day. And I'm down here just about every day because I'm a slow learner, so I need to be here. Yeah, gardening is big. I collect baseball cards, and when you're an English teacher, you don't read for fun very much because you're preparing for classes and you're reading papers. So now I've been reading a great deal, especially science fiction and fantasy. And I love the movies. I'm lucky now I get to go to the movies for the matinees. They're cheaper. And most of the time I sit there with my popcorn. I'm one of 3 or 4 people in the theater. So it's very private, and that's what I do in my spare time. It's a lot of fun. And things would have been different if I had gone into the military right after high school. I would have been an entirely different attitude, entirely different person. Since I went to college first, that gave me an education that changed my mind about a lot of things and made me think for myself. And looking back on the whole experience, I was just a very, very fortunate fellow. My brother graduated from the Naval Academy. Richard Nixon gave the commencement address. And at that time, the war was over in Vietnam, and he said they had hoped what we would have for the first time in the history of the country is a generation of peace. And of course, his dream has not been fulfilled. We seem always to be at war someplace. Men and women are still dying. Every soldier fights so that there's no more war, so we can live in peace. And you would think in our evolution as a people that by this time we would be smart enough to realize that destruction and killing is not the way to do things. But we haven't. We still have enemies. People don't like us for our lifestyles. I don't understand much of why, but whenever we have kids or my own boys, when they travel, there are people that hate Americans. You have to understand that. And what you have to understand is you're an ambassador for your country. You have to try to undo what's been done before you. When we were in India, we went for a wedding, and I talked to a fellow, and I told him, I said, I thought it was great that so many kids were going to school, because everywhere we went, we saw kids at school, all wearing their uniforms and all paid by the state. And he said, well, if you're thinking of education for literacy, yes, we have more people that can read and write, which is good for communications. He said, if you just want education to get a better job so you can make more money, yes, our society is more mobile than ever before. But if the purpose of an education is to make a difference in the world, we still have a long way to go. And he is one of the wisest men I've ever met. I remembered those words, and everybody I know goes to college to get a good job. We're there for the money, for the lifestyle. Hardly anybody I know is trying to make a difference. Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, when you're a billionaire, then you can say, yes, I'm going to do good with my money. But most of the people that I know that have gone to college, all of my friends went to get a better job, to have a better lifestyle. And they brag about their cars and their boats and their summer homes. And I brag about where I've traveled. It's only through places like this that you can really make a difference. We do a lot of charity work here. It's a better community because of groups like the Elks and the Moose and the Lions and the Kiwanis and the American Legion. Add the churches to all that, and that's what makes a community.
We have children to teach, and we have sick to be cured, and we have men to be freed. There are poor to be lifted up, and there are cities to be built, and there's a world to be helped. Yet, we do what we must. I am hopeful, and I will try with best I can with everything I've got to end this battle and to return our sons to their desires. Yet, as long as others will challenge America's security and test the dearness of our beliefs with fire and steel, then we must stand or see the promise of 2 centuries crumble.